but perhaps his direct kind of certainty and definitive statements surrounding its superiority could be due to personal bias due to his relationship with the hip thrust, having been the inventor of it. So I figured this would actually be quite funny because this dawned on me after the Julia Renee video, where obviously I spoke about her blocking me, and then my friend mentioned that I should do a video where I basically review the workouts of influencers who have blocked me. So that's what we're going to do today. And first on the list is Sam Sweeney, so Mrs. Sweendog, somebody who I spoke about last year at some point, I believe, when I was speaking about maybe, I think, natural versus enhanced athletes, and I just gave an opinion that at that time when I filmed the video, I believed that there was a chance she may have been enhanced. I didn't ever say definitely, because again, I have no proof. It's merely an opinion. Do I still hold that opinion today? I'm uncertain. I haven't really looked into her much since then. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Looking at Sam. It's funny how she's now taken off 110% natural from her bio, which is something I actually pointed out in that video before she blocked me. Basics are best. Just some leg day goodies from our first leg day of the new split. Movements like this, it really does depend on context, like why is she training, what is she trying to achieve? For example, the context of hypertrophy, the good morning is a good movement, absolutely. Is doing it with a barbell better than a dumbbell? I would probably say absolutely, because you're probably going to be able to load a lot more weight on your back than you could hold it here, and ultimately you are looking to train the posterior chain. The last thing you want to is going to be your shoulders or arms fatiguing before your posterior chain, limiting how effective that movement is for the target musculature. So a hip thrust, big fan of the hip thrust. Essentially, when you're doing any kind of like bridging variation, the big thing you want to avoid is allowing the shins to shift back. We want to maintain vertical shins for as long as possible. Even if you have to reduce range of motion, you can certainly do that if it means that the majority of the emphasis is actually going to be placed on the glutes. As soon as you start shifting back, other muscles may be getting involved as well. So for example, like the quads, etc., etc. A glute kickback of sorts, yeah, again, absolutely fine. I think doing glute kickbacks, although back in the day, so many years ago, I was actually quite against the kickback. It's only because I would see a lot of influencers perform them relatively badly, whereas I think if they are actually done properly, and depending on the goals obviously, I think they actually can be a great addition to workouts, and I often do program a kickback variation of sorts for many of my clients. Again, depending on their goals obviously. A goblet squat, I've spoken about the goblet squat so many times, countless times. I think for the sake of hypertrophy and, oh, it's a dog. That's a good dog. that dog. That's my friend. That is a stance. You see how the dog's stood? That's a power stance if I've ever seen one. Oh, he wants to get involved. Oh, he wants to jump in partner training. Oh, I love it. Look at the dog. Yeah, with the goblet squat in context of hypertrophy, I've spoken about this many times. Realistically, other things are going to fatigue before your quads do, so your core, your shoulders, etc., etc. That's obviously going to limit how effective that movement is for the target musculature and the lower body in general. That being said, I do believe there may be a time and place for the goblet squat, perhaps something like for technical purposes. So if you're learning to keep more of an upright torso during squat patterns, this could certainly be thrown in there. If your goals are outside of hypertrophy and you believe this movement aligns with your goals, absolutely, that would work too. Oh, this is my favorite exercise I've seen thus far. It's called giving the dog some love. Her technique, so Sam's technique, is bloody beautiful. There's a big idea is that you must maintain a upright torso when you're really trying to emphasize the quads as much as possible. That doesn't really matter so much. What actually matters is amount of knee flexion. Sam's ability to maintain such an upright torso with such consistent technique, even in flat shoes, I believe, going to that depth is fantastic. That's brilliant. I love to see that. I'm not going to talk about this because I struggle to stand on my 2 feet, let alone my 2 hands. So to be honest, I have nothing to say here other than I can't do this, nor will I ever likely be able to do this. And if I did try and do this and I fell, most countries within about 1,000 miles or so would know about it because seismic activity may well be reported. I'm choosing to speak about this from the context of like hypertrophy and whatnot because that's kind of my preference, but I don't know what she's actually training for, so I'd like to know. We're going to full back and biceps training day. Number 1, weighted scat pull-ups. It's a 1A, which implies it's a superset followed by wide grip lat pull-downs. The lat pull-down is actually a really good movement. I know I spoke about this before, how I didn't think the lat pull-down was particularly great for the lats. I thought they're better alternatives. That was way back then. I've actually since changed my mind and kind of done some more research into the biomechanics surrounding movement patterns and whatnot. Essentially concluded the lat pull-down is fantastic for the lats as well as the upper back, provided you do it correctly. Between lockout and 90 degrees, is going to be very upper back focused. Between 90 degrees and to the body is going to be very lat focused. So if you want it to be a really effective movement for the lats, you must make sure you're going as low down as possible, ideally 2, if not very close to the chest, like around here. Number 2, single arm cable lat rope. Yeah, fantastic. It's annoying that you can't like rewind Instagram clips because I have to keep pausing it. You'll notice how Sam is actually kind of leaning slightly to the working side, which is something I would actually implement myself. We're looking for is a slight degree of lateral flexion. Do you need to? No, but you can certainly incorporate that additional pattern if you wish to, as lateral flexion is something the lats can do. Chin-ups, banded assisted. Again, a lot of lat work here because, again, underhand grip brings in more of the biceps. Good technique. Seated, easy bar partial. Again, I don't know if I would superset movements like this together personally. Again, you certainly can if you want to, but again, from the context of hypertrophy, straight sets are likely going to be more effective for building muscle. Your biceps are already going to fatigue quite a lot doing the chin-ups, supersets with the bicep curl. Is that not going to then limit your ability to effectively work the back? If you're looking at doing chin-ups with the idea of prioritizing the back, flip it around. If you're looking at doing it with the idea of prioritizing the biceps, I think there are probably better alternatives out there. Elbow supported hammer, fantastic movement. I love this. The fact she's using this on the lat pull down using the pads as elbow support, genius idea. I've seen a few people do this. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Interesting workout. I think quite a lot of volume for me personally. Again, not right or wrong, it's just my preference, but an interesting workout nonetheless. I think ultimately Sam's goals are probably very different to mine, but it's clear that building muscle is something that she does focus on. It's just very interesting to see a slightly different approach to training that I wouldn't necessarily take myself, and it's interesting. I like it. It's cool. It's cool. TFNL group coaching and the TFNL growth guide are always going to be linked down below in the description and also in the comment section as well if you fancy checking them out. The community coaching has both gym and home workout options, and there's currently a 1-week free trial going on if you fancy giving either of them a tickle with no commitment and no pressure. And the growth guide is always linked down below as well if you fancy a fitness resource that will teach you a lot of the things I talk about in much greater detail. I believe it's 84 pages, as well as giving you 30 weeks of programming if you fancy following it. This time, a man who has blocked me. We're looking at Bret Contreras. He's obviously blocked me for obvious reasons because I gave my opinion on some things that had come out about him. Not saying it was fact whatsoever, just merely gave my opinion. The inventor of the barbell hip thrust. This is going to be interesting for later, and you're going to see why. 15 reasons why the barbell hip thrust is the best movement, basically.
15 reasons why the hip thrust is biomechanically the most amazing glute exercise in existence. First, it's extremely stable. The more stability, the higher the glute activation. Second, it's easy to learn and doesn't require a lot of coordination.
Valid, very valid. Stable movements are good.
5, the hardest part of the hip thrust is at the top, at the lockout, and this happens to be where the glutes have their greatest moment on.
The glutes do really tickle short and position dominant movements, which is why like thrusting variations are actually quite good for the glute development. The man is saying he's the inventor of the barbell hip thrust. Fantastic. That to me would imply there's potential for certain bias towards that movement, as he's obviously invented it. It's kind of potentially what he's known for. Chris Beardsley actually recently posted a study. The glute bridge involves higher glute max muscle activation than the hip thrust, likely because hip thrust involves greater quadricep muscle activation, in which he's stating, and Paul Carter's actually, I believe, said this before, that the hip thrust is obviously fantastic, but they may actually theorize that the glute bridge, which is a slightly different variation, may actually be better than the hip thrust. And this is obviously explaining why that may be the case. So although I understand that the hip thrust is fantastic, and I'm a big fan of it, I don't think saying that this is the best movement in existence is probably the best way to approach it. I simply think that saying this is a really good movement, being the hip thrust, but so is the glute bridge as well. You can do both. They have a time and a place. Is maybe probably a better way to approach it. But perhaps his direct kind of certainty and definitive statement surrounding its superiority could be due to personal bias due to his relationship with the hip thrust, having been the inventor of it. An at-home grow your glutes workout. Let's find out. Number 1, Bulgarian split squats. Fantastic, fully agree. Single leg hip thrust. Again, actually fully agree. I think at home, great options. High deficit reverse lunge. Again, actually back this. I think these are so far very valid movements. So hip abduction. Again, yes, I think can do if you can add resistance. Side lying hip raise. Again, if you can add sufficient resistance. The frog pump is probably the one I wouldn't favor so much myself. Straight to bent leg reverse hyper. Again, I think you're getting a lot of glute volume now that you probably don't need to include. I think what I would probably prioritize is maybe like 3 or 4 of those movements and just make sure you're actually overloading them efficiently and you're able to incorporate sufficient resistance. I think these movements largely are actually very good. The one I'm not really a massive fan of is the frog pump. That's just my personal preference. I don't love it. I think just standard bridge or thrust variations themselves are going to be superior. Again, the movements like that are typically to me are very much like burn dominant movements, when in reality I don't think you need that kind of burn to see progress. I think what is really going to drive the progress is actually just going to be mechanical tension, being training really hard and doing more and more each week if you can, or as often as you can. I think as a whole, this overview of this being a good home glute workout is very valid. I think there are some very good movements in here, especially when you are at home and you may be limited for equipment. That could maybe justify the inclusion of things like frog pumps, where you would choose maybe less effective movements purely because you don't have a lot of options otherwise. This really highlights to me how you can work the glutes very effectively from home if you have something such as a table that will support your weight and the weight you may be adding. Despite whether they've blocked me before and despite my opinions on them as individuals or professionals, I think I will always try and eliminate or at least reduce that bias as much as possible and give hopefully somewhat unbiased opinion on the content itself. I think my opinions on Sam, although I may not align with all of the movement she's doing personally, I don't think anything is right or wrong. I think they probably align better for her goals, which aren't necessarily the same as my goals. I have my opinions on Bret based on what I have seen and the things I have uncovered through doing some reading on it, which obviously I made clear in the videos. Again, based on my opinion, I'm not very happy with what has happened. I'm actually very unhappy with what's happened. I think it's very troubling behavior and actually very concerning behavior, and it really does sadden me that people like professionals in the industry and coaches have been allegedly accused of such things. But separating that opinion completely and looking at the actual content itself, I'm merely stating that I think the hip thrust is a good movement, but maybe the glute bridge might be better for you, who knows, and that these glute exercises that he's recommended you can do from home are also very valid. But I do always question is if I've said something that's upset somebody and then they've blocked me in response to that or got very angry with me in the DMs perhaps, I do always question whether a defensive response such as that could be due to a potential feeling of guilt that may be underlying. I'm not saying it is, I'm theorizing and giving an opinion based on that. I think his response to me essentially expressing how disappointed I was with what I'd heard says a lot, and I would have much rather a conversation, to be honest. But it is what it is. I can't get upset. I'm not ever looking to upset anybody. I'm not ever looking to be negative or anything like that. I'm merely trying to give my voice and my opinion on some of the things I really care about. Those things largely include fitness, mental health, and people. Actually, this is actually kind of relevant now to comment question of the week, where this individual asks, my personal trainer always emphasizes the importance in the context of hypertrophy of full hip extension, even going into hyperextension in the top of the concentric phase of a hip thrust. In your opinion, is being able to fully straighten the hips at the top more important than increasing the volume? With a hip thrust, you need to ensure that you're trying to shorten the glutes as much as possible. Do I think you need to hyperextend? No, what I think you need to do is shorten the glutes as much as possible and take them through their full active range of motion. Because the glute bridge or the hip thrust is a shortened position dominant movement, I wouldn't ever really want to sacrifice that shortened position for the sake of partial reps. If it was a lengthened position dominant movement, then partial reps in that lengthened position would have more of a time and a place. But for me personally, I think as long as you can shorten the glutes fully, then you're doing fine. If you're then risking positioning and maybe your back health for the sake of trying to get a bit further, then maybe not worth it. Just full active range of motion is what we're really trying to achieve. That is it. That is the video. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for not blocking me, and thank you for tolerating the video.